All right, let's jump right in. We're going to explore an economic framework that asks a really powerful question. What if our economies were designed not just for endless growth, but for actual human well-being?
For decades, we've pretty much used one number to grade how well a country is doing: gross domestic product, or GDP. It's the grand total of everything a country produces. But here's the thing. What if that whole scoreboard is just broken? What if it's making us chase all the wrong things? See, GDP has some massive blind spots. Think about it. Cleaning up an oil spill actually makes GDP go up, but the value of a clean ocean in the first place? GDP doesn't see it. It treats a finite resource like oil as if it's just regular income we can earn forever. And maybe most importantly, it tells us absolutely nothing about whether people are happy, healthy, or if society is fair. So if the old scoreboard isn't working, what's the alternative? Well, that brings us to this idea of an Islamic gross domestic product, or IGDP. Now, the idea here isn't to just toss GDP in the trash. It's about adjusting it, fundamentally. IGDP takes that standard GDP number and runs it through a new set of filters. Filters for morality, for environmental impact, and for long-term sustainability, all to get a much more honest picture of a society's actual well-being. So how does this actually work? Well, it's basically a three-step process. First, you take out goods and services considered socially harmful. Second, you subtract the costs of things like pollution and environmental damage. And third, you completely rethink how you account for using up natural resources. And this third point, this one is a real game changer. Instead of seeing a barrel of oil as pure income, this framework says, hold on, that's a gift we're holding in trust for all future generations. So the deal is, if you take some of that asset out of the ground, you have an obligation to create something of equal value, like new technology or better infrastructure or education to leave behind for the future. This different way of looking at the world also completely changes the role of the individual in the economy, especially when it comes to how we spend our money.
You know, in the conventional model, the consumer's job is pretty simple: maximize your own happiness and wealth. But this framework imagines a totally different kind of consumer, one who is always trying to strike a balance between their own needs and their responsibility to the wider community.
So think of your income. It isn't just split into two piles, spend now and save for later. There's a third, dedicated portion for the well-being of others, through things like zakat and other forms of charity. It's like a redistribution mechanism that's built right into your personal budget.
And this isn't just a nice suggestion, right? It's a core economic incentive baked into the system. The whole framework is built on this idea that being generous and spending for the community actually brings you a personal and spiritual return.
Okay, so if individuals are guided by the well-being of society, what about the government? What's its job? Well, this framework sets a very, very different top priority for how a country should be run. In a lot of economic systems, we kind of accept that some level of unemployment is just a part of life. It's seen as a natural part of the business cycle. But here, having a job is viewed as a fundamental social and economic duty, and that makes getting to full employment the #1 overriding goal of public policy, period. Conventional economics has always had this big debate, right? You've got the classical view on one side saying, hands off, the market will fix itself. And then you've got the Keynesian view on the other side saying, no way, the government has to step in and manage things to fight unemployment. Well, in this model, that debate is basically over. The state doesn't just have the option to intervene, it has a moral obligation to act. It's expected to use every tool in its toolbox, fiscal policy, monetary policy, you name it, to guarantee jobs, justice, and stability for its people.
All right, so finally, this whole perspective, it doesn't just stop at a country's borders. It zooms out to the global stage and really redefines the whole purpose of international trade.
Usually, we think of trade as a way for countries to get richer, to sell more than they buy. But in this view, that's secondary. The real goal of trade is to be a tool that brings all of humanity closer together, that builds cooperation, and that, hopefully, makes conflict less likely. Economic ties become human ties. And this principle of working together for good, of offering mutual support, that's a core tenet that's meant to guide how nations are supposed to interact on the world's economic stage.
Okay, so this is a really fascinating idea, right? But how does it actually stack up against the real world?
Take a look at this number, 17%. Just 17%. What could that possibly represent? Well, here's the irony. This number really highlights that gap between the ideal and the reality. A 2011 study found that among the member countries of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, trade with each other made up only 17% of their total trade. It kind of suggests that this grand vision of economic unity and cooperation, well, it's still a pretty long way off.
And all of this leaves us with a really big final thought. Forget where the framework comes from for a second, and just think about the question it forces us to ask about any economic system. What could our world look like if we moved beyond just chasing growth, and we really, truly put human well-being, sustainability, and justice at the very top of our scoreboard?